Are you ready to learn the harsh truth about Victorian luxury, which popular movies and TV shows have kept hidden from us for so long? When we hear about this era, wealthy ladies in lavish, voluminous dresses appear in our imagination as utterly carefree beings, completely free from any everyday problems or routines. It seems as though their entire lives consisted solely of strolling leisurely through blooming gardens, sipping tea at a leisurely pace from incredibly expensive porcelain, and whirling through the night at glittering balls. But what if I told you that all of this is just a beautiful illusion? Today, we're going to rip off the masks. But before we dive into these shocking details, go ahead and like this video right now and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new historical investigations. Done? Then let's continue. In reality, however, behind this glossy and perfect facade lay an incredibly grueling schedule. Believe me, their actual daily routine resembled the schedule of a modern CEO of a huge corporation more than the life of a fairy tale princess. Every minute of their time was strictly regulated by the unbreakable and sometimes absurd rules of high society, as well as the complex management of a massive estate with dozens of servants. Get comfortable and be sure to watch this video all the way to the end, because it's in the finale that you'll learn the main secret, how a single, seemingly minor and harmless mistake in the daily schedule could not only cause a scandal, but also permanently and irrevocably ruin the reputation of an influential aristocrat. It's going to be really interesting. Let's get started. What lies behind the pretty picture completely changes our perception of 19th century comfort. The morning of a wealthy lady began long before the sun's rays illuminated the windows of her large bedroom. Around 6 in the morning, she opened her eyes to mentally plan the long day ahead. She couldn't afford to lie in bed for long as she managed a huge, complex household. The lady of the house had to plan the menu, assign tasks to the servants, and map out a precise itinerary for her visits. Soon, the head maid would quietly enter the room with a tray bearing a cup of hot tea. This drink helped her fully wake up and prepare for the arduous organizational and emotional labor ahead. Outside the bedroom door, the bustling work of dozens of servants had already begun, all awaiting clear instructions from their mistress. The mistress mentally went over the list of necessary purchases, assessing the supplies of coal and flour in the large pantries. To make a mistake in her calculations meant showing incompetence, which would instantly become the subject of heated discussion in high society. Every detail demanded attention, from the freshness of the starch for the tablecloths to the quality of the silverware's polish. After morning tea, the lady would begin reviewing the correspondence that had accumulated since late the previous evening. On a special silver tray, invitations to dinner parties, bills from suppliers, and notes lay in neat stacks. Each letter demanded an immediate and proper reply, composed in accordance with all the strict unwritten laws of social etiquette. The woman carefully sorted the papers, separating important financial documents from empty, routine social correspondence. She made notes in her notebook so she could later pass on instructions to the housekeeper or the head butler. This routine clerical work took about an hour and demanded the woman's utmost intellectual concentration. After a long session with the papers, the mistress had to prepare for her first outing from her private quarters. She took the bunch of keys to all the rooms in the house, which were always entrusted to her for safekeeping at night. This heavy bunch of keys symbolized her absolute authority over the entire vast estate and its numerous servants. Without her personal permission, no one could open the wine cellar or the cabinet containing very expensive Indian tea. Control over the supplies was necessary to prevent theft and the unjustified overuse of expensive imported goods. The woman carefully attached the keys to a special belt, which she always wore with her simple morning gown. This was followed by a brief conversation with the head housekeeper, who came for her morning instructions and orders. The mistress gave her a set amount of money for small daily expenses and the purchase of necessary fresh groceries. Together they discussed the plan for cleaning the rooms, doing the laundry, and cleaning the carpets for the entire week ahead. The woman had to know exactly how long it took to polish the furniture or wash the tall windows on the first floor. She personally set the standards for cleanliness and strictly punished the servants for the slightest speck of dust on the carved mantelpiece. Managing a staff of 20 people required an incredibly strong character and excellent organizational skills. Only after resolving all the accumulated household matters could a woman allow herself to move on to her personal hygiene routine. She would call a maid to assist with washing, as bathrooms as we understand them today simply did not exist back then. Heavy jugs of hot water and large painted porcelain basins were brought into the bedroom for the morning ablutions. Washing was done in stages and required a certain degree of skill to avoid accidentally soaking the expensive carpets and antique furniture. Fragrant floral oils or thick herbal decoctions were often added to the water to soften and moisturize the skin. This hygiene routine was merely the initial preparation for the most complex stage of the entire morning ritual. Choosing the right morning gown was no less important a task than composing the perfect elaborate menu for the upcoming dinner. The outfit had to be simple enough for managing the household, yet elegant enough in case of a sudden visit from relatives. Most often, ladies preferred modestly cut dresses made of very dense fabrics in austere, non-fading dark shades. Hair was carefully combed and styled into a strict updo, which was expected to hold perfectly until evening. The use of bright makeup was strictly frowned upon, so the pallor of the face was accentuated only by a light layer of pale powder. This entire process took up a great deal of precious time and required complete trust in the skills of a personal, experienced maid. By 8 o'clock in the morning, the mistress was fully prepared to face the new day, fully equipped and in perfect order. She had already completed a volume of behind-the-scenes work, comparable to the duties of a modern manager of a small, comfortable hotel. Her mind was under great strain, and her schedule was strictly planned down to the minute until late in the evening. And this was only the very beginning of a long journey consisting of complex social rituals and endless household chores. Do you agree with this? Please share your thoughts on this in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel.
Yes, sir.
What if I told you that everything you believed was a lie? The process of dressing a Victorian lady was not simply a matter of choosing a pretty outfit from a huge wardrobe. It was an incredibly complex, multi-step operation, comparable to assembling a complex mechanical device in a factory. It required the participation of at least 2 experienced maids and took about an hour and a half of precious morning time. The slightest misstep in the sequence of clothing layers led to catastrophic discomfort throughout the long day. Every item in the vast wardrobe had a strict purpose and was put on in a strictly defined order without exception. It all began with a thin cotton or linen shirt, which was worn directly against the bare, clean body. It reliably protected the expensive fabric of the outer dress from sweat and the natural oils secreted by human skin. Over the shirt were worn long, loose-fitting trousers, richly decorated with fine lace along the lower edge of the wide legs. These undergarments were changed daily and sent to be laundered, which was incredibly hard manual labor. The cotton had to be perfectly clean and ironed with hot irons so as not to cause the slightest irritation to the skin. Several petticoats were worn over the steel frame at once, with the number sometimes reaching as many as 6. They were sewn from very thick cotton or warm flannel to ensure comfort in the cold, stone English homes. The petticoats also effectively concealed the outlines of the crinoline's steel hoops, softening the silhouette of the outer dress. Each petticoat was heavily starched, so walking briskly produced a characteristic loud rustling sound of the fabric. The total weight of all these hidden layers of undergarments could amount to several kilograms of constant load. Only then would the maid incredibly carefully retrieve the morning or afternoon formal dress from the wardrobe. It most often consisted of 2 separate parts, a very heavy skirt and a bodice that fit tightly to the body. The bodice was fastened with dozens of small buttons or metal hooks arranged in a long row on the back or chest. Fastening them on one's own was absolutely impossible, so the help of an experienced maid was vital every morning. The sleeves were narrow and often had intricate lace cuffs that had to be protected from dust and dirt. Particular attention was paid to the choice of footwear, which was always put on before the maid tightly laced the corset at the back. These were high boots with laces or buttons, made of very thin soft leather or thick fabric. The maid used a special metal hook to fasten the many small buttons on the narrow high shaft. The boots had to fit the legs snugly, without allowing even the slightest crease in the material, which was considered a sign of sloppiness. The sole was extremely thin and was certainly not intended for long walks on the muddy cobblestone streets of London. The ritual of dressing was merely the first serious morning ordeal in a long series of endless, strict social obligations. Afterward, a woman would slowly descend to the dining room, where another strictly regulated domestic routine awaited her. There, she was expected to play the role of an endlessly gracious hostess before all the members of her large family. How do you think this daily routine affected the character and health of aristocratic women? In the next chapter, you will learn why a typical morning meal turned into a veritable theatrical performance. I will reveal the best-kept secret of wealthy 19th century households. Breakfast in a Victorian family was never simply a mechanical act of satisfying a ravenous morning hunger upon waking. It was the family's first formal gathering of the day, where each member played a clearly defined social role. The lady of the house sat upright at the head of the table, managing the incredibly complex process of serving hot dishes and beverages. She had to carefully ensure that the small talk at the table remained consistently light and pleasant. Any display of a bad mood or physical fatigue was considered an unacceptable breach of etiquette. The morning table setting was a true work of art, consisting of dozens of different items. Heavy silver coffee pots, delicate porcelain cups, and crystal jam bowls were arranged in a strict geometric order. The snow-white starched tablecloth was not to have a single crease or the slightest food stain. The lady personally poured hot tea and coffee, which was considered an incredibly honorable duty and an exclusive privilege. She had to remember exactly the preferences of each family member, how many sugar cubes and how much milk to add for each. During the meal, plans for the day, upcoming social visits, and the latest city news were discussed calmly. The wife listened to her husband with the utmost attention, expressing complete agreement with his views on political or complex financial matters. Arguing or voicing one's own radical ideas at the breakfast table was strictly forbidden by strict etiquette. The atmosphere had to remain absolutely calm and peaceful to put the head of the family in a productive working mood. The woman acted as a skilled diplomat, smoothing over any potential conflicts among the younger relatives. Breakfast was also a special time for business discussions with the governesses and for reviewing the strict schedule of lessons. The mistress gave instructions in an even voice regarding music lessons, French, and classical drawing. She regularly checked on her charge's overall progress, without delving into the tedious details of the complex academic subjects themselves. Her main task was to ensure the continuous process of strict upbringing within the rigid moral framework of the Victorian era. All instructions were given in a confident tone that brooked no objection whatsoever from the hired staff. Many ladies secretly viewed this long morning ritual as an extremely arduous and utterly unavoidable chore. They could not simply drink a cup of strong coffee in the complete silence of their room and read a book in peace. Every one of their carefully measured actions was evaluated by the servants and relatives present with incredible and frightening severity. The slightest deviation from tradition was perceived as a clear sign of moral decline throughout the entire large family. Therefore, the performance titled "The Perfect Breakfast" was mercilessly repeated day after day without a break. Once the dining room was finally empty, the mistress could at last turn her attention to her administrative duties. She would quickly make her way to her small private office or library, where all the household archives were kept. There, towering stacks of ledgers, cookbooks, and long shopping lists for the mansion's needs awaited her. This routine paperwork, hidden from prying eyes, was the foundation of the estate's financial well-being. Managing the enormous family budget required incredible precision and impeccable accuracy. Victorian household functioned smoothly like a well-oiled Swiss mechanism, precisely because of this hard work. Women silently bore the burden of enormous responsibility for every guinea and pound sterling spent. Their colossal contribution to the family's economy very often went unnoticed and was completely underappreciated by their contemporaries. This hidden labor required an exceptional mathematical mind and constant, intense intellectual effort. Be sure to like this video if you too were impressed by the hidden side of these amazing women's lives. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about is that these women were truly outstanding managers. A Victorian mansion was a veritable miniature enterprise with its own staff and complex logistics. The lady of the house confidently served as chief accountant, personnel manager, and purchasing director all at once. In her office stood a massive wooden desk piled high with ledgers and bills from greengrocers and butchers. She had to meticulously balance the debits and credits every week to ensure the annual budget wasn't exceeded. Making a mistake in choosing a servant meant putting the safety of valuables and the reputation of the entire household at great risk. Employment contracts were long-term, and the conditions of hard labor were strictly negotiated in advance. Strict inspections of the staff's work were conducted regularly to maintain a high level of iron discipline. The woman would make surprise rounds of the rooms, checking for the complete absence of dust on the paintings and the impeccable cleanliness of the floors. She might run a snow-white handkerchief along the far mantelpiece to check the maid's work. Any minor infractions were punished with severe fines, which were deducted from the servant's small fixed wages. This constant, total control required incredible strength of character and a readiness for inevitable conflicts. The mistress was also personally responsible for the regular purchase and proper storage of a vast quantity of supplies. A large house constantly required high-quality furniture polish, starch, soap, and coal for all the fireplaces. She kept detailed inventory lists that accounted for every delicate plate and every silver tray. Once a month, a full inspection of the expensive porcelain and crystal was conducted to check for small hidden cracks and chips. If something broke, the servant at fault had to immediately compensate for the entire damage out of his own meager pocket. The difficulty lay also in the fact that all available technologies of the time were quite primitive and manual. Preserving the freshness of perishable foods without refrigerators required a complex system of deep ice houses and pantries. A woman had to know exactly how to store meat properly so that it would not spoil during a few warm days. She personally oversaw the process of preserving fruit, boiling thick jams, and pickling fresh vegetables for the winter. This valuable knowledge was passed down from mother to daughter and was considered absolutely essential for any aristocratic woman. This constant, heavy administrative burden made the mistresses incredibly pragmatic and calculating people. Behind their outwardly deceptive fragility and grace lay the absolutely iron core of an experienced leader. They managed their enormous homes with the confidence of renowned admirals commanding a large naval fleet. Not a single minor detail escaped their incredibly attentive and professionally rigorous gaze. The house was their true kingdom, where they established strict rules and ensured their unquestioning enforcement. After finishing her complex paperwork, the mistress would set out to inspect the most remote work areas of the house. Her usual route led her to the places where, through hard labor, the foundation of comfort for the entire large, wealthy family was being built. There, completely different Pungent smells and sounds reigned, carefully hidden from the guests in the grand, bright halls. How difficult do you think it was to manage such a huge number of hired workers on a daily basis? In the next chapter, you will learn how the strict inspection of the noisy kitchen and dark storage rooms took place. Descending to the lower floor of the enormous mansion meant plunging into a harsh working world hidden from prying eyes. The kitchen was the very heart of the house, where water was constantly boiling, meat was sizzling, and fresh bread was baking. The mistress entered this incredibly stuffy room to conduct her inspection, checking the copper and stoves polished to a shine. The head chef greeted her with deep respect, ready to give a detailed account of every pound of flour used. They quickly discussed the final details of the complex evening menu, making adjustments based on the food delivery. The woman examined the huge oak kitchen tables, where meat and fish were cut up, with the utmost care. The surface of the wood had to be scraped clean, without the slightest trace of congealed grease or ordinary dirt. She strictly inspected the condition of the sinks, where special dishwashers were constantly washing mountains of dirty dishes. Hygiene in the kitchen was the absolute guarantee of the entire family's health, so the standards were incredibly strict. The slightest unpleasant sour smell coming from the drain was grounds for a serious financial reprimand of the staff. The true pride of any wealthy household was a deep wine cellar stocked with rare vintage wines. The mistress rarely went down there, as it was considered the traditional domain of the butler or her husband himself. However, she was required to know the selection and exact number of bottles of expensive French wine perfectly. For a formal dinner party, wines were selected with particular care, individually matched to each specific dish on the menu. Strict control over the wine cellar prevented the secret theft of incredibly expensive beverages by unscrupulous servants. Next came a thorough inspection of the spacious room, where fresh vegetables, fruits, and root vegetables were carefully stored. Potatoes, carrots, and large turnips lay in special deep wooden crates filled with clean, dry river sand. Fresh apples were neatly arranged on wide shelves so that their sides did not touch one another at all. The housekeeper strictly checked for any spoiled fruit that could instantly infect the entire winter harvest with rot. This incredibly routine inspection saved hundreds of pounds from turning into ordinary trash due to oversight. Equally important was a regular visit to the storage room to ensure the proper storage of coal and dry firewood for the fireplaces. The enormous Victorian mansion required a colossal amount of fuel daily for heating during the cold winter months. Large piles of black coal lay in special bunkers, where they were delivered through dirty hatches straight from the street. The woman personally inspected the quality of the coal, as poor quality, cheap coal produced too much acrid black smoke. She calculated precisely whether the supplies would last until the next scheduled large delivery from the coal company. Special attention was paid daily to the room where the silverware and formal tableware were carefully stored and cleaned. The expensive silver tarnished from the dampness, so it had to be polished regularly with special, strongly scented polishes. The footmen diligently polished the forks and spoons to a perfect mirror-like shine under the strict supervision of the head butler. The mistress might unexpectedly pick up any piece of cutlery and check its absolute cleanliness with a snow-white cloth glove. The impeccably gleaming, massive silver on the table was the chief symbol of the high status and wealth of the entire family. Having finished all her morning household chores, the lady would return to her bright chambers to prepare for her public appearances. It was time to fulfill her external social obligations, which were no less complex and convoluted. Victorian society functioned relentlessly according to strict rules, where every step was laid out in handbooks. The afternoon was invariably devoted to maintaining connections with the city's influential and powerful figures. It was an incredible world of conventions, where a small card made of thick paper determined the fates of many people. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how social networks were built in the 19th century? In the Victorian era, there was no internet, but there was an incredibly complex system for exchanging business cards. These small rectangles of thick paper served as a kind of social currency and a ticket to high society. The sizes, fonts, and even the rounded corners of the cards carried encrypted messages of great importance for the recipient. Managing this endless stream of paper was one of the main daily duties of a wealthy and respected woman. Every day, precisely in the afternoon, the lady would take a carriage to make brief formal visits. She would bring with her a special silver or leather case, incredibly tightly packed with calling cards. The card bore only the owner's name, with no address, which her peers of equal status already knew perfectly well. Strict etiquette dictated at what times and to whom exactly such formal courtesy visits could be paid. Violating the proper visiting hours was considered a terrible insult that could lead to a severing of relations. The card's appearance was entirely subject to strict rules that prohibited excessive ostentation or cheapness. The paper had to be of the highest quality, preferably ivory or the color of pure snow. The typeface used was extremely simple and elegant, without any superfluous, oversized monograms or shiny gold embossing. The use of brightly colored paper or non-standard sizes was considered a sign of extreme vulgarity and bad taste. The cards were ordered from the finest printing houses in London and cost a considerable amount of money for the family budget. Cards were also widely used to express polite condolences or congratulations on important occasions. In the event of mourning, the card was bordered with a wide black border, the width of which depended on the closeness of the relationship. Congratulatory messages were often accompanied by short handwritten notes on the back of thick, expensive paper. This system successfully replaced phone calls and allowed people to maintain steady contact with hundreds of acquaintances. Every day, footmen ceaselessly delivered dozens of such messages to various addresses throughout the vast, foggy city. Young unmarried women had no cards of their own and were simply listed on their mother's cards. Only after a successful marriage did a woman earn the right to her own name in the card index of high society. This vividly underscored the patriarchal nature of society, where a woman's status depended entirely on her position. Receiving her first personal card was an incredibly important symbolic step into adult social life. From that moment on, the young wife bore the full burden of maintaining her new family's connections with the rest of the world. After completing a long round of visits, a lady would return home to receive guests herself. Now she was expected to sit in the formal drawing room and await those who would arrive for the anticipated return visit. It was time for the classic afternoon tea, which was a distinct and very important social institution. Do you consider such incredibly complex social rules justified for maintaining order in society? In the next chapter, you will learn about the strict requirements for receiving guests in one's own home.
The weather was mercifully calm.
The time between 4 and 6 in the evening was strictly reserved for receiving visitors in the formal drawing room. The hostess would change into a special, elegant tea dress, which was slightly less formal than her morning attire. It allowed her to loosen her corset just a little and feel more at ease among a small circle of acquaintances. The parlor was lavishly decorated with fresh flowers, and a very bright and incredibly warm fire was lit in the large fireplace. The atmosphere was meant to be as cozy as possible and conducive to relaxed social conversation over a cup of tea. Conversation during tea was strictly and unquestionably governed by the unwritten rules of good social etiquette. It was strictly forbidden to discuss politics, religion, illness, or financial difficulties in the company of strangers. Topics for polite conversation were to be light: the weather, the latest theatre premieres, or art exhibitions. The hostess was expected to masterfully steer the conversation, preventing awkward and interminably long silences. She skillfully engaged everyone present in the conversation, displaying true wonders of tact and social diplomacy. If there were a large number of guests, The hostess was expected to give equal attention to each person. She moved gracefully through the spacious living room, shifting from one group of guests to another with a light half-smile. To leave anyone completely ignored was considered the height of inhospitability and could lead to very serious offense. This required an excellent memory for faces and names, as well as knowledge of the intricate family ties of everyone present. The intellectual strain during such receptions was comparable to playing an incredibly complex game of chess. Social visits usually did not last long, so as not to tire the hosts at all, and to allow them to receive other people. Guests very tactfully took their leave after half an hour, freeing up comfortable seats for new visitors to the mansion. Footmen ceaselessly brought in fresh hot tea and quickly cleared used cups from the small tables. This non-stop conveyor belt of social interaction ran absolutely smoothly thanks to the hostess's precise instructions. She controlled this entire complex process with subtle nods of the head and incredibly brief glances at the servants. In addition to the usual brief courtesy visits, the ladies regularly hosted representatives of various committees. Important matters regarding the organization of charity bazaars, charity concerts, or fundraisers were discussed. This was a unique, hidden professional life for Victorian women, skillfully disguised as social tea parties. They professionally discussed budgets, assigned responsibilities, and planned advertising campaigns for their events. Their business acumen and ability to achieve complex organizational goals were vividly evident in these dry conversations. By 6 o'clock in the evening, the steady stream of visitors finally dried up, and the grand drawing room gradually emptied. The hostess remained in the long-awaited silence, feeling incredibly physically exhausted from hours of non-stop socializing. Her face ached from the constant polite smile, and her back throbbed from the incredibly tight lacing of her corset. But the day was far from over, and new, no less complex tasks lay ahead. She had to immediately prepare for the main event of the day, which demanded even more strength and attention. A short rest before the formal dinner was often devoted to reading useful books or working on charitable projects. Women absolutely could not allow themselves to lie on the sofa, as idleness was considered a great sin. They resolutely picked up knitting needles or a needle and thread to engage in exclusively useful needlework. Every spare minute had to be spent on self-improvement or helping the poor. This strict philosophy of constant work was incredibly deeply rooted in the consciousness of Victorian society at the time. Charity in the 19th century was not merely an act of goodwill, but an incredibly strict social obligation. A wealthy woman was expected to consistently devote part of her time and resources to helping less fortunate members of society. This vividly highlighted her high moral character and bolstered the family's prestige in the eyes of the strict church. Ladies organized special committees dedicated to raising funds for the construction of large, free soup kitchens. They spent long, tedious hours writing letters with polite requests for donations to influential people. This monotonous, tedious needlework was considered an incredibly virtuous and absolutely proper occupation for a true aristocrat. Even the most expensive, heavy fabrics were often re-sewn and altered to create practical and warm garments. The work of one's own hands was valued far higher than a simple, mechanical donation of money from her husband's vast fortune. Organizing large charity bazaars was another important and very complex part of women's social work. They rented huge halls, decorated them, and set up long tables to sell a wide variety of goods. At these crowded bazaars, they sold handicrafts, embroidered pillows, paintings, and incredibly delicious homemade baked goods. The socialites themselves confidently stood behind the counters, selling goods to their wealthy acquaintances at greatly inflated prices. All funds raised were meticulously accounted for and directed toward financing necessary public projects. Charitable work was also an important outlet for self-fulfillment for these incredibly intelligent and highly energetic women. In a world where professional careers were completely off limits, It was the only way for them to put their organizational talents to use.
Take what you need.
Women created entire aid networks covering vast swaths of London's industrial outskirts. They conducted complex negotiations with coal and bread suppliers, securing substantial wholesale discounts for their numerous charges. This hard work required toughness and the ability to advocate for those who were completely unable to stand up for themselves. Despite its often tedious and formal nature, this large-scale activity yielded incredibly immense practical benefits. Thanks to the titanic efforts of wealthy women, hospitals for the poor and large public libraries were built. They fully funded the work of professional nurses in the remote industrial districts of major English cities. Their incredible organizational skills helped a vast number of people in the complete absence of government assistance. This was an entirely invisible yet critically important part of the economy of the vast and incredibly wealthy British Empire. But even while engaged in these noble and charitable deeds, women were required to strictly adhere to the strict bounds of propriety. They were absolutely forbidden from personally visiting dangerous working-class neighborhoods or associating with people of dubious or bad reputation. All necessary contact with aid recipients took place exclusively through trusted intermediaries or local clergy. A lady's impeccable moral reputation was always her most important and fiercely guarded asset. The slightest shadow of doubt regarding her moral character could instantly undo all her noble and important endeavors. After several grueling hours of productive work, the time finally came to prepare for the evening's formal events. Charity temporarily gave way to a return to incredibly strict and very lavish social rituals. The hostess had to change her entire outfit once again to fully meet the requirements of a formal dinner party. This process was even more incredibly complex and labor-intensive than the morning's arduous ritual of lacing up tight corsets. The vast evening wardrobe represented the pinnacle of tailoring artistry and a social display of status. About an hour and a half before the formal dinner, a woman would retire to her chambers for the complex evening change of clothes. This process required no less effort and time than the incredibly long morning preparations for the day ahead. The maids had already carefully prepared hot water, laid out the luxurious gown on the bed, and set out the family jewels. The morning dress, numerous petticoats, and even the tight corset were removed and replaced with completely fresh garments. The evening formal appearance demanded impeccable, flawless cleanliness and an incredible appearance without the slightest trace of fatigue. Evening gowns differed radically from daytime ones, with their incredibly deep necklines and completely bare shoulders and arms. Only the most expensive fabrics were used: heavy, lustrous velvet, shimmering silk, or the finest light satin. These lavish gowns were richly adorned with incredibly intricate hand embroidery, beads, lace, and velvet ribbons. A dress for a formal dinner lasting several hours could weigh several kilograms due to the abundance of heavy decorative elements. Carrying such incredible weight all evening was a true test of extraordinary physical endurance. The evening corset was very often laced even tighter than the morning one to create an absolutely perfect, fashionable silhouette. The exposed pale shoulders demanded impeccable regal posture, which was ensured by an incredibly rigid whalebone frame. A woman was absolutely forbidden to relax her back or lean back in her chair for even a single moment. She had to sit perfectly upright, showcasing the incredible beauty of her neck and massive jewels. This incredible constant tension led to frequent headaches in the incredibly stuffy and hot ballrooms. The evening was the only time when a lady could openly display her family's most impressive jewels. Incredibly heavy necklaces made of diamonds, blue sapphires, or large green emeralds were worn around the neck. Hands were lavishly adorned with heavy, massive gold bracelets, and incredibly long, sparkling earrings were worn in the ears. The quantity and quality of the gemstones directly indicated the immense financial power of the wealthy husband's family. These jewels were carefully stored in heavy iron safes, and brought out only for absolutely special, solemn occasions. It was strictly mandatory to wear incredibly long white silk gloves that completely covered the forearms. They were absolutely forbidden to be removed during dancing or conversation and could only be taken off at the enormous dining table. The gloves had to fit incredibly snugly, so they were often put on while damp and dried for a long time directly on the body. This wardrobe item was so incredibly important that a lady might change several pairs of snow-white gloves in a single evening. The slightest smudge on the thin white skin was considered an absolutely unacceptable violation of the incredibly strict evening etiquette. This transformation was very much like donning gleaming, heavy armor before stepping onto the brutal social battlefield. Every element of formal attire and every sparkling accessory served a specific, precise purpose in this complex game of status. The hostess had to completely outshine the other ladies with her splendor, yet without appearing too vulgar or provocative. Striking this incredibly delicate balance between luxury and good taste was the primary and very difficult task of the evening wardrobe. A mistake in the choice of color or style would be the subject of heated discussion in London salons for many months to come. Descending into the grand drawing room, the majestic lady joined her husband to greet the guests invited to dinner. The very final and incredibly crucial part of a long and incredibly arduous Victorian day was beginning. The dinner party was the absolute culmination of the mansion's social life, showcasing its incredible wealth and hospitality. All the preparatory work of the professional chefs, footmen, and the hostess herself had to come together in a perfect symphony. Ahead lay several hours of absolutely unrelenting tension and incredibly strict adherence to all the rules of the banquet. A dinner party in a vast, opulent mansion was an incredibly grand event requiring colossal preparation over many days. Guests arrived precisely at the appointed time. The slightest delay was considered the height of terrible impropriety. The hosts politely greeted them in the grand drawing room, where a lengthy round of introductions took place. Men in formal black tailcoats and women in luxurious gowns formed an incredibly dazzling crowd. Conversations were conducted exclusively in hushed tones until the butler solemnly announced that dinner was served. The procession into the enormous dining room proceeded strictly by rank, according to the titles and social standing of the distinguished guests. The host led the highest-ranking titled lady, while the hostess walked with the most honored and wealthy male guest. Seating at the enormous table was planned in advance, taking into account absolutely every possible affinity and hidden animosity. To err in this hierarchy meant to inflict a completely fatal insult upon an important and incredibly influential person. A woman had to keep in her head an incredibly complex scheme of titles and the tangled family ties of the aristocracy. The formal menu consisted of a vast array of courses, served in a strict and absolutely unbreakable sequence. They began with incredibly light soups and broths, followed by exquisite, expensive fish appetizers. Then came the main meat courses, game, elaborate salads, and a variety of vegetable side dishes. The dinner concluded with incredibly sweet desserts, cheeses, fruits, and very expensive aged wines. This gastronomic marathon could last several long hours in an incredibly stuffy, candlelit, enormous room. The banquet was served by an entire army of well-trained footmen in white gloves and formal livery. They moved absolutely silently, changing dirty plates and refilling drinks in tall glasses with incredible synchrony. The hostess controlled this incredibly complex process with nothing more than a slight twitch of her eyebrows or fleeting, brief glances. Everything had to run like clockwork, without a single hitch or a silver fork dropped on the floor. Perfect service was the most important indicator of a household's status and a source of immense pride for its owners. During the meal, the lady continued with incredible fortitude to fulfill her primary social role as a highly skilled conversationalist. She had to constantly maintain lively conversation with her neighbors along the very long table. The topics remained extremely light and casual, completely excluding any arguments or heated discussions. The woman ate very little, as her tight corset and the need to speak politely at all times hindered normal digestion. Her main sustenance on this incredibly difficult evening was the guests' attention and a successfully conducted diplomatic conversation. Closer to midnight, the guests finally began to slowly make their way home in their carriages, waiting on the street. The hosts saw them off in the vast hall, exchanging the customary pleasantries and thanks for the wonderful evening. When the heavy door closed behind the last visitor, the mansion was finally plunged into an incredible and relative silence. But the hostess's incredibly long workday was by no means over yet. The final tasks still lay ahead. She had to personally ensure that the servants had begun cleaning the reception rooms and had securely locked all the doors. Returning to her bedroom, the woman dismissed her exhausted maid after she had helped her remove the incredibly heavy dress. The unfastened corset finally allowed her to take her first real deep breath of the entire incredibly long day. She removed her heavy jewelry and put it away in the safe, feeling an incredible and absolute physical relief.
Yes, ma'am.
Physical and immense mental exhaustion washed over her in an incredibly heavy wave, completely draining her last ounce of strength. At that moment, all the glamour of aristocratic life vanished completely, leaving behind only a person exhausted by incredibly hard labor. The day of a wealthy Victorian lady ended late at night, only to begin anew a few hours later with utter ruthlessness. Her life was an endless, incredibly complex series of duties, rituals, and very strict social constraints.
Just a bit more, madame.
Behind the beautiful facade of incredible luxury lay the exhausting, grueling labor of a manager of a vast enterprise. This invisible, hard work was the foundation upon which all the grandeur of the 19th century rested, and this legacy deserves no less respect than the exploits of famous generals or the discoveries of scientists. The history of Victorian women debunks the popular myth that incredible wealth automatically leads to a carefree life. Behind the expensive lace and diamonds lay iron discipline, sharp minds, and incredible work ethic. They effectively managed massive budgets, led staff, and masterfully wove the empire's complex social networks.
Once, ma'am.
Suggest new topics in the comments for future videos about the hidden history of everyday life that you'd like to see on our channel. And be sure to subscribe so you definitely don't miss out on new fascinating investigations into life in the past.